How are you guys? Don't forget to leave a review and enjoy the story. Enjoy watching. The story begins. Kaido Arihara slowly opens his eyes as he wakes up. He asks in surprise if he really fell asleep. No one answers him. His classmates are already getting ready to go home. Kaido looks at his watch and realizes that classes are already over. It is raining outside. The main character walks under an umbrella, smiling, and thinks about what a nice dream he had. In it, he was playing with animals. But in the next moment, Kaido's expression changes, and he thinks sadly and uncertainly that the animals will not be able to love him in real life. Kaido stops and looks to the side, where he notices 3 cats under a tree. Kaido exclaims enthusiastically, looking at the cats with loving eyes. The 3 animals, noticing the protagonist, jump up and hiss hostile. In the next moment, the cats rush away, and Kaido freezes with a confused expression on his face. MC says that they are not so cute after all. He thinks with disappointment that the animals hate him. As soon as Kaido approaches, the birds fly away, the elephants hide, and even the lions try to run away. The protagonist exhales in disappointment, continuing to think about how much he loves animals, that maybe there's something wrong with him. Maybe it's some kind of curse or disease. Kaido turns around sharply at the call. His classmate Shishihara is walking towards him, standing with a book and an umbrella, her head slightly bowed. She says with a little confusion that the cats ran away from there and notes that the animals still seem to dislike the main character. Kaido asks in surprise if she knows about his problem. Hesitating, Shishihara says that when they were in elementary school, she said something terrible to MC. The main character reacted to her words with confusion. She recalls how, as a child, she angrily said that even if the protagonist loved animals so much, they still didn't love him back. Kaido stands disappointedly to the side, looking at the frightened rabbits. MC asks if it was her. Shishihara bows and apologizes, saying she didn't mean to hurt him. Kaido doesn't know how to react. Shishihara continues, apologizing for not apologizing earlier, saying that she didn't think there was a suitable opportunity. The main character asks her not to worry about it, because if she hadn't said anything, he wouldn't have remembered. Shishihara breathes a sigh of relief and thanks him. Kaido awkwardly asks if she likes books. Shishihara enthusiastically says that she loves to read, and now she has an atlas of mystical creatures in her hands. The two begin walking together. The main character says that he also likes to read such books. Shishihara looks at him doubtfully. She nods decisively to herself and wants to say something, but she is interrupted by a bright flash. Both begin to panic and do not understand what is happening. An incomprehensible pentagram flashes on the ground beneath Shishihara's feet, and they find themselves in an unknown space. Shishihara is frightened and screams, asking what is happening to her. Kaido tries to reach the heroine, shouting at her, trying to pull her out of the circle. But it turns out that Shishihara is surrounded by a barrier. The main character is thrown back by this barrier, and Shishihara tries to reach out and save her classmate. Kaido falls down and doesn't understand what is happening at all and passes out. The main character opens his eyes and jumps up. He absent-mindedly notes that there is some kind of stone ceiling above him with cracks through which light is shining. Kaido sits up and looks around. He is lying on something like an altar surrounded by stone walls and a stone floor. Looking around, he asks into the void why he is here. Jumping up, Kaido panics and goes to look for Shishihara. He runs through the corridor and finds himself in a large hall. Kaido says into the void that she is nowhere to be found. An image flashes through MC's mind of his classmate, standing in a strange, glowing pentagram. He tries to understand why he ended up in this strange place and how it could have happened. Suddenly, Kaido remembers that he has his phone with him, takes it out of his pocket, but it turns out to be broken. The main character exclaims irritably that this is all just some kind of joke. He decides to continue on his way, wondering what to do next. Continuing down the corridor, Kaido discovers that the passage is blocked. Looking around carefully, the protagonist notices a gap in the debris that is too small for him to squeeze through. Turning to the right, Kaido notices something else. It turns out to be a skeleton sitting near the wall. Kaido jumps back in horror, stumbles, he falls to the floor, trying to crawl away. The main character cannot take his eyes off the corpse and, stammering, begins to think that the same fate awaits him. Suddenly, a small pebble falls to his right. A small black cat is sitting on top of the rubble. Kaido wonders how it could have ended up in such a place. Under the rays of light, the cat stared intently at the main character and, without even giving him a chance to ask a question, jumped sharply right at him. Kaido didn't even have time to take a step before the animal knocked him off his feet. Lying on the hard floor, struggling to breathe, Kaido wondered why he never got along with animals. And when the cat began to hiss loudly and threateningly at him, baring its sharp fangs, he was overcome with even greater fear. In a state of extreme fear, Kaido began to apologize incoherently for saying that cats were unlovable. He just wanted to pet them, because he loved them very much, and life had already punished him enough. But instead of attacking, the cat gently touched his cheek with its paw. Kaido froze in confusion. The animal continued to touch Kaido's face, who was mentally delighted by this and by how soft its paws were. The cat froze for a moment, settling on the guy's chest, and then it asked if he was its owner. Kaido just froze in shock, his eyes wide with amazement. Then the animal explained that everything that had happened was nothing more than magic. Kaido, frozen in shock, stammered and asked if it was a talking cat. The creature jumped from his chest onto the stone floor and corrected him, saying that this was not quite true. Then it headed for a stone pedestal, standing a little to the side, and jumped onto it to get a better view. Kaido, leaning on his elbow, raised himself up, unable to take his eyes off it. At that moment, the cat's outline blurred, wavered, and transformed. Its fur changed to feathers, its body shape changed, and now an owl sat in front of Kaido. The creature introduced itself as a resident of these ruins, a monster with no fixed form. In other words, a shapeshifter. The shapeshifter explained that it was not limited to one appearance, and to confirm these words, its form began to change. The owl turned into a black rabbit, and then a snow-white dog appeared in its place. The creature explained that it could take the form of any animal, acquiring all of its abilities. Then the monster turned back into a black cat, noting that Kaido liked this form more than the others. Still unable to get up from the floor, the main character asked again in confusion, his voice clearly trembling with fear. He couldn't believe that sitting right in front of him was a real shapeshifter, like a magical creature that had come off the pages of a manga or a video game. The creature looked at him with incomprehension. The boy's words about some games and manga did not elicit any response from it. Instead, the shapeshifter asked the main question, was Kaido really its master, and how did he end up in these ancient ruins? The protagonist hesitated slightly, not knowing how to explain what had happened to him. But the shapeshifter understood everything anyway. The creature in the form of a black cat made a suggestion. Apparently, his master had been summoned by someone and transported to this world. Kaido sat down more comfortably, looking at the animal with curiosity and asking what this summons was. It explained that a person with the qualities of a hero is chosen from another world and summoned to this one through a special ritual. Kaido froze, overcome with horror, mentally trying to comprehend what he had heard. At first, his brain refused to believe it. The story of another world seemed like nonsense. But everything he had seen with his own eyes confirmed this idea. Kaido thought about the creature's words for a moment, then asked about the heroic qualities. He asked what was so special about him that he had been chosen for this role. The shapeshifter replied that a girl with the same qualities was supposed to arrive with him, but for some reason, he ended up alone. He didn't look like a hero, but there was something special about him. The animal's eyes showed that Kaido's figure seemed to be enveloped in invisible fire. Kaido froze in confusion, pondering the words, and the creature asked if he wanted to leave these ruins with him. Mentally accepting the situation, Kaido replied that he had already given up hope of getting out and asked if the monster would go with him. The shapeshifter leaned forward slightly and replied that there were other magical creatures in these ruins besides him, and therefore, yes. The creature explained that the strongest of these guards the entrance, and if other magical creatures approach, they will be killed immediately. Kaido asked with interest, pausing slightly, if it was possible to negotiate with them. The shapeshifter replied that there were very few creatures in this world capable of understanding human speech. The boy nodded slightly, taking note of this. After a pause, the monster added that in such a situation, he needed a person who would become his master. Kaido asked what it meant to become a master. The creature explained that he would become a master tamer, endowed with a special talent for subjugating monsters. Kaido's face lit up with understanding, and he asked if that meant a tamer was someone who used magical creatures. The creature tilted its head slightly, surprised that the human was already familiar with the concept. Kaido, slightly embarrassed, admitted that he had already encountered something similar. Kaido explained mentally. Although he had never heard of shapeshifters, in the games he played, it was possible to create a character capable of subjugating magical creatures. The shapeshifter clarified that the master's magical power was special. It could endow monsters with great power. Kaido asked about the nature of this power. The creature explained that it affected the mind, either enchanting or subjugating it to its will, and that a person simply had to be aware of this. Kaido asked in surprise if he really had such power. To test the main character's abilities, the shapeshifter asked if he had any ideas. Kaido just spread his arms helplessly. Then the creature suggested starting with something simple. For example, trying to scare away some kind of animal. Kaido exclaimed indignantly, not understanding such a test, as he loved animals too much. The shapeshifter continued, suggesting that even the man's current skills should be enough to scare away animals, as it should be at the level of instinct. Kaido fell to his knees in despair, shouting in a breaking voice that he didn't understand how to get rid of his hatred and fear of animals. Ignoring the man, the monster continued, explaining that this was precisely why he had chosen him as his master. Kaido froze for a moment, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, and replied that he understood everything. Standing up, Kaido put his hand on his chest and asked seriously if he understood correctly that by combining his magical powers with the monsters, they would be able to bypass the creature guarding the entrance and leave the ruins. The shapeshifter was delighted, confirming the guess and noting that the man was quick-witted. Kaido, without taking his eyes off the creature, asked his question. He asked why, since the monster had lived here for so long, it had decided to leave now. Had it been waiting all this time for someone like him to appear? The monster slowly closed its eyes. Then it moved to the opposite edge of the pedestal. Its gaze fell on the skeleton sitting to the side, the remains of its former master. Kaido looked in the same direction, and the creature, hesitating, explained that this man had once taught him speech, magic, and many other things. Turning to the hero and looking intently into his eyes, the cat added that although this was not the best way to convince him, but it really wanted to see the outside world with its new master. The shapeshifter fell silent. Kaido froze at first, not knowing how to respond to these words, but then nodded decisively to himself. He asked seriously what they should do now. The creature raised its head in surprise and asked excitedly if Kaido really agreed. If so, then they should try to trick the monster guarding the entrance with the help of a special human power in order to get outside. The main character straightened up and looked much more confident. He firmly stated that he trusted the monster because now it was the only creature he could rely on, and added that now they had become friends. The shapeshifter nodded with satisfaction and asked Kaido to hold out his hand so he could scratch it lightly. The main character complied with slight apprehension, but without objection. The cat put its paw on the wound and asked him to focus on his hand. Kaido nodded, although only one thought was spinning in his head: how cute and soft the cat's paws were. A second later, he shook his head to concentrate. At the same time, the monster began the ritual, reciting an ancient oath. A ghostly glow rose from the point of contact between them, slowly enveloping them both in a dense cocoon of light. When he finished speaking, the cat trembled for a moment, then withdrew his paw. Exhaling heavily, the shapeshifter announced that the contract was concluded and that although the method might seem old-fashioned, it was effective. Kaido stared intently at his hand and asked if the monster had become his familiar. Without answering the question, the cat asked Kaido to close his eyes. He obediently complied. In the darkness, Kaido saw a flash of light. It gradually took on the shape of a cat. The glowing creature asked if he could now sense its presence. Kaido opened his eyes and exclaimed that he now understood everything. The shapeshifter reminded him that they had not yet been introduced. It introduced itself as Sif, explaining that it wanted to find new friends and asked for the man's name. The main character held out his hand and introduced himself as Arahara Kaido. Sif extended a paw in a gesture resembling a handshake. Suddenly, Kaido turned around, causing the shapeshifter to raise his head. He asked how they could get out since the passage was blocked. Sif unexpectedly jumped onto Kaido's shoulder and mysteriously announced his magical abilities, bestowing flame and bestowing lightning, and strengthening physical power. The black cat bared its teeth, lit up by flames that instantly engulfed the surprised Kaido. The main character clenched his fists, feeling his body fill with strength. He opened his eyes wide, mentally marveling at the magic. The shapeshifter explained that only after signing a contract could he grant his master auxiliary magic, and now that power was stronger than ever. He clarified that Kaido would now be able to clear debris with a single blow. Kaido looked at his hand with excitement, thinking that now he could do anything. Without even listening to Sif, Kaido swung his arm and ran forward. And with one blow, he destroyed the debris. Sif clung to his master's shoulder with his claws, trying to hold on, and cried out in surprise. The stones fell with a crash, and both the man and the cat watched in fear and amazement. Kaido exclaimed enthusiastically that it was very cool and wondered if it was his magical power. Sif, his eyes wide open, looked at the stones in horror and replied that it was not the power of a tamer, but something completely different. The main character froze, thinking about how in games and manga, tamers don't fight themselves, but send their monsters. Kaido stared thoughtfully at his hand. Then he raised his fist enthusiastically, declaring that this was the power of a combat tamer. The shapeshifter froze in confusion. Kaido seriously asked Sif if he thought it was cool. He thought to himself that even a single use of this power had produced amazing results. He was genuinely happy to meet Sif and felt that he was beginning to adapt to his new reality. Still enveloped in magical flames, they gazed at the passageway that had formed. Kaido thought of Shishihara, hoping that they would be able to escape and defeat the huge monster guarding the exit. Kaido and his familiar Sif walked down the dilapidated corridor. Sif said that this place was once the stronghold of the Demon Lord, and these words sent a chill down the protagonist's spine. Continuing on their way, Sif added seriously that a new demon had now appeared, proclaiming himself the Lord. This was probably the reason Kaido had been summoned to this world. The main character froze, concentrating on what he had heard. For Shishihara's sake, he was even ready to fight the Demon Lord. Sif looked at the man and noticed that something else was much more important. Kaido's magic had turned out to be unexpectedly powerful. In response to Kaido's clarifying question, the shapeshifter explained that the physical enhancement the man had used worked much more effectively than expected. He suggested that even if they used Kaido's magic to enhance others, the result would not be as impressive. The monster suggested that this might be due to the overly strong kinship between their magics. Sif paused and settled himself more comfortably, asking Kaido if he had any experience in martial arts. Kaido replied, slightly embarrassed, that he had practiced karate in elementary school and sometimes watched wrestling shows with his father. The familiar tilted his head slightly and admitted that he didn't understand these words, to which Kaido asked him not to worry about it and asked how Sif had learned about his abilities. The cat, staring intently at the hero, explained that the blow with which he had smashed the debris was very spectacular. Still looking at his interlocutor, the creature added that instead of forcing his familiar to fight, Kaido was strong enough to stand up for both of them. The main character stared at the cat in amazement, excitedly and stammeringly asking if the tamer was really capable of such a thing. Sif bowed his head slightly and said firmly that such a thing was not normal. In response, Kaido raised his fist triumphantly, proclaiming himself the top tamer. The familiar frowned as he looked at the jubilant Kaido and suggested discussing their next steps. Sif explained that Kaido now had to choose another monster as his familiar. Kaido raised his right hand, asking if he understood correctly that they would need many allies to increase their strength. In his mind, he already had an image of an entire army of monsters ready to fight under his command. However, Sif gently dampened his enthusiasm, reminding him that, apart from himself, Kaido could only contract with one other creature. Kaido was slightly disappointed, but accepted this limitation. Sif explained that a new ally must be chosen very carefully. It would be best to find someone who would suit his magic and fight in the thick of battle. But after these words, the cat fell into thought. He rubbed his head with his paw, in confusion, trying to figure out where to find such an assistant in these ruins. Suddenly, strange sounds came from behind the heroes. Both turned toward the noise and saw a group of hostile monsters that looked like lumps of slime. They were furiously attacking one of their own kind, which differed from them in color. With each passing minute, their attacks became more aggressive, and the victim was unable to fight back. Sif explained that they were monsters called slime. While Kaido stood there in a daze, the cat added that the one being bullied was a rare mithril slime. Kaido asked again and requested an explanation of what mithril meant. The shapeshifter explained that it was a rare species that appeared after eating a special mineral called mithril. However, the mineral slowed the slime down so much that it couldn't even fight off ordinary slimes. Sif and Kaido continued to watch the uneven battle. Suddenly, the changeling chuckled thoughtfully, jumped onto Kaido's shoulder, and suggested taking the mithril slime as a second familiar. The main character looked at the cat in surprise, raising his right hand for convenience, and asked if he was sure about his suggestion, since this slime seemed too weak. Sif, without taking his eyes off the mithril slime, explained that if Kaido wanted to increase his strength, this demon would be a good choice. In an emergency, it could become a living shield. Kaido looked at the cat and nodded, showing that he understood. Sif concentrated, activating his physical enhancement ability. The heroes were once again engulfed in magical flames, and Kaido clenched his fists with a determined look. The shapeshifter looked encouragingly at Kaido, letting him know that he was now ready to deal with the enemy slimes. The main character muttered uncertainly that he would try. The next moment, he lunged forward so quickly that Sif couldn't hold on to his shoulder and fell down. Kaido swung his arm back and struck. He struck the stone floor next to the slime with such force that the shockwave scattered the slimes in different directions. Standing amid the dispersing dust, Kaido exhaled and straightened up, stretching his aching arm. The shapeshifter who approached said it was truly amazing. Kaido looked at his familiar and replied that he was glad everything worked out. Suddenly, there was a quiet sound behind him. Kaido turned around and saw the mithril slime with tears in its eyes. He crouched down and asked if everything was okay. The slime jumped up happily, showing that everything was fine. The slime continued to jump up and down and make indistinct sounds that Kaido did not understand. Sif, who had approached, suggested that the monster clearly liked the man. The main character looked at the slime again and, still hesitant, offered to make it his familiar. The slime jumped excitedly, clearly expressing its agreement. Kaido held out his hand, which had a small wound left over from the previous ritual, and placed his palm on the stone floor. Sif gently touched it with his paw, and the mithril slime approached from the other side. When the shapeshifter began to recite the words of the magical oath, all three were illuminated with a magical glow. After the ritual was complete, Sif announced that Kaido had now become the master of his second familiar. The delighted slime immediately jumped onto Kaido's shoulder. The main character noted that it was surprisingly light. The shapeshifter approached the man and suggested giving the new, familiar a name. Kaido thought for a moment, then suggested the name Lime, as light as the monster itself. The slime jumped happily, expressing its agreement. Sif jumped onto the free shoulder, and Kaido asked what they would do next. The main character got to his feet and continued down the corridor, hoping that the shapeshifter would be able to figure out how to use their powers, and that Lime would quickly get used to being a familiar. The creature remained silent, and Kaido looked at his companion with concern. The next minute, Sif stood up, bristled his fur, and cried out in fear that they had been spotted from such a great distance, probably because the guards had been attracted by the smell of magic. A deafening roar came from the depths of the corridor. The whole trio jumped up in fear. Sif dug his claws into Kaido's shoulder, shouting that they needed to hide behind a stone pillar immediately. Kaido tried to say something, but the shapeshifter immediately interrupted him and asked him to hide quickly. Once in hiding, Kaido crouched down and tried to figure out what kind of creature it was. Sif thought for a moment, then explained. It was a three-necked Orochi, the strongest and most ferocious inhabitant of these ruins. The monster was huge and terrifying. It had 3 heads on long necks, with sharp fangs in its gaping mouths. Each head had horns sticking out like a crown. Its entire body was covered with shiny scales. Kaido cautiously peeked out from behind his cover and froze, his eyes wide open. He recoiled, staring into the void, his whole body shaking with a slight tremor. Not noticing the man's condition, the shapeshifter said that at their current level, they had no chance against the guard. Kaido muttered distantly that they had no choice anyway. They had to get out. At that moment, Orochi's deafening roar rang out from behind them. Sif began to explain that the guard had once been part of the Demon Lord's inner circle, and now they couldn't defeat him. But then the shapeshifter turned to the man, and his voice sounded determined. He reminded Kaido that he was no longer alone. He had 2 familiars, and together they could open up new possibilities. Lime supported Sif, looking hopefully at his master. But Kaido only cowered in fear. He was shaking, his eyes filled with terror. Thoughts raced through his head that he would not be able to defeat the guard, that he did not want to fight the demon, and that he wanted to return to his own world. Only now did Sif notice Kaido's trembling and call out to him. Lime looked at his master with concern. The shapeshifter tried to calm Kaido down, but Kaido only looked at him distractedly. Sif realized that fearless creatures were actually fragile, and people who were afraid but kept moving forward showed true strength. Kaido quietly uttered Sif's name, mentally acknowledging that without meeting him, he might already be dead. A sudden rustling sound from Lime made him turn around. Together with the shapeshifter, they watched as the slime began to change shape. Gradually, it turned into something resembling a cuff, comfortably positioned on Kaido's forearm. Seeing the willingness of even such a small and weak creature to fight, Kaido firmly decided that he would not die in this place. He realized that both Lime and Sif also wanted to live. Besides, he needed to make sure Shishihara was safe. Kaido began to get to his feet. Sif asked if everything was all right with his master. Kaido replied in the affirmative. Then the shapeshifter shouted loudly for his master to run with all his might, and the protagonist took off. The black cat used his ability to increase his physical strength. As they approached Orochi, they saw a shocking sight. The monster was silent, engrossed in its meal. The bloody limbs of other creatures protruded from its mouths, and streams of blood flowed around it. Kaido realized with horror that he had mistaken this eerie stillness for inaction, when in fact, the Guardian had been devouring the other inhabitants of the ruins all along. Orochi noticed Kaido running and swung its tail, trying to knock him off his feet. The shapeshifter commanded him to jump, clinging to Kaido's shoulder. He managed to jump away, and in the next moment, A deep dent formed where he had been a second earlier from the monster's tail strike. Even in midair, Kaido realized the danger of the situation. Sif shouted about the approaching threat on the left. Turning around, Kaido saw Orochi's gaping maw, ready to devour him. Kaido froze, his breath catching in his throat. At that moment, Lai made a sound. He stretched out sharply and attached himself to the ceiling, pulling his master aside. Orochi closed its jaws inches from Kaido, causing him to cry out. Lime gently lowered his master to the floor away from the monster, then stretched out and looked questioningly at Kaido. Kaido dropped to one knee, leaning his hand on the stone slabs. Sif rose up on his shoulder and announced that Lime had saved the man. The slime swayed happily on his hand, but the main character continued to sit with his head down, consumed by one thought. He thought he was going to die. His body was shaking, and his legs refused to obey him. Noticing his master's condition, the shapeshifter told him not to give up because he was not alone. Lime took his place on Kaido's arm. Summoning his willpower, Kaido stood up, breathing heavily. He clenched his teeth and mentally ordered himself to move forward. With a loud cry, Kaido sprang from his spot. Orochi rushed after him, spitting out an unknown liquid in his wake. It landed very close by. Sif looked at it and realized with horror that it was poison, shouting that it had hit him. Kaido replied that he was already running as fast as he could. As he struggled to escape from the monster further down the corridor, Kaido thought anxiously that even if they managed to escape from the ruins, Orochi might continue the pursuit, and then there would be no chance of survival. The monster followed them relentlessly, unconsciously destroying everything in its path. Sif, watching this, suggested an idea. Orochi was not only chasing them, but also destroying the supporting columns. Kaido looked back. He suggested collapsing the remaining pillars to block the passage. The shapeshifter agreed, adding that Lime was capable of taking any shape and length. The slime immediately slid off Kaido's hand. It stretched out and turned into a huge club. Delighted, Kaido exclaimed that this was exactly what he needed. Then Sif used his flame infusion ability, and the club burst into flames, illuminating the space around it. The familiar urged him to abandon common sense and focus all his fury on the fight for survival. Kaido looked at him in surprise at first. Then, with determination in his voice, he shouted that he understood. He swung the burning club with all his might and brought it down on the nearest column. The powerful blow caused the stone pillar to collapse, triggering a landslide. The recoil from the blows reverberated in his hands with a throbbing pain. Kaido screamed silently in pain, but he knew he couldn't stop. Gritting his teeth, he continued to destroy the remaining columns, still running away from Orochi. He delivered blow after blow, moving much faster than a normal person. When the job was almost done, Sif shouted that if they turned left, they would soon be at the exit. The shapeshifter encouraged his master, asking him not to slow down, especially now that the ceiling had begun to collapse and debris was falling from all sides. Kaido could no longer respond. He could no longer feel his hands from the pain, and blood was flowing all over his body. It seemed as if he was about to lose consciousness. His thoughts raced in agony, his hands shaking from the strain. With difficulty dodging the falling rocks, the heroes continued to run towards the exit, following the instructions of Sif, who shouted encouragingly that there was very little left. Orochi was already a step away from Kaido, his roar deafening, his fangs bared in a vicious grin. In a rage, Kaido grabbed the club and swung it at the last column, turning the stone pillar into a pile of rubble. But in the next moment, his strength left him. Kaido froze, almost falling under the weight of the club. Sif cried out when he saw his master begin to fall. A thought flashed through Kaido's mind that the magical enhancement had run out and he had no strength left of his own. His body was numb with pain and exhaustion, refusing to obey him. Then Lime changed shape again, stretched toward the ceiling, attached himself, and began to pull his master up. At that moment, Orochi, who had just missed his prey, appeared where Kaido had been standing. The enraged monster raised all three heads and began to spew poisonous streams indiscriminately. Straining with his last ounce of strength, Lime continued to move Kaido and Sif from side to side, dodging the poisonous spray. Orochi continued, growling in frustration, when debris from the ceiling began to fall, preventing him from following the heroes. At the last moment, Lime managed to throw all three of them out of the ruins. They landed painfully on the ground and rolled over several times, letting out muffled cries. Kaido lay on his back, staring at the dazzlingly clear sky. The sun warmed his face gently, and all he could think about was that they were finally outside and alive. His attempt to move was unsuccessful. His body wouldn't obey him, trembling with a slight shiver. Blood streamed down his face from his cut forehead, and he could only make an indistinct sound. His familiars immediately rushed to him, anxiously calling out to their master. Kaido turned his head with difficulty and smiled weakly, saying he was glad to see them unharmed. His eyes began to lose focus, but he continued, saying that he himself was now safe. The pain strangely receded, giving way to a growing drowsiness. His last words were that everything would probably be fine. He just had an unbearable urge to sleep right now. No sooner had he uttered these words than Kaido sank into unconsciousness. Sif desperately shouted for his master to hold on, that he had no right to die now. Lime looked at Kaido with tears in his eyes. Before consciousness completely left him, Kaido managed to notice how the familiars rushed to seek help. There were traces of people nearby. His last vague thought was of Shishihara. He hoped she was all right. When Sif and Lime returned with help, Kaido was already unconscious. They were followed by 3 strangers in armor, 2 girls and a man. Layla exclaimed in surprise that the ruins of Orochi were collapsing. Friend quietly asked if it was a child lying in front of them. Keel immediately suggested taking the injured person to the city as soon as possible. Kaido lay unconscious, his face pale, his breathing barely noticeable. The 3 strangers in armor approached, wondering how this young man had managed to escape from the destroyed ruins. Kaido could barely make out their vague silhouettes, but he could no longer fight sleep. His eyes finally closed. Sif's desperate cry rang out across the valley, calling for his master. The black cat repeated Kaido's name in despair, but he no longer responded. Waking up in an unfamiliar throne room, Shishihara slowly came to her senses. People in long robes with staffs stood around her, and an elderly man wearing a crown sat on a raised platform. To his left was a man in unusual attire. The man, looking intently but kindly at Shishihara, introduced himself as the ruler of the kingdom of Furjin and said that she had been chosen for her heroic qualities. He then asked where she had come from. Shishihara felt nervous and timidly said that she was from Tokyo, Japan. The king fell silent, looking confused. He turned to his assistant and asked where these lands were located. Visibly nervous, the assistant stammered that he couldn't know, as he had never heard of such a kingdom or lands. The people in robes also whispered among themselves, confirming that the name was completely unfamiliar to them. The king looked in surprise at the girl who had arrived, still sitting on the floor, and suggested that she might have come from another world. Shishihara froze in confusion. A commotion arose in the hall as the courtiers loudly discussed what they had heard, unable to believe such a possibility. The ruler interrupted the discussions, bowed his head to Shishihara, and apologized. He explained that heroes were usually chosen from their world, but this time, due to an oversight, they had summoned her from another world. Shishihara frowned, indignant at the words about the mistake. Then she told herself to calm down, still not believing that the people in front of her were serious. Commotion broke out in the hall again. The courtiers shouted that summoning from another world was impossible and expressed fears that the kingdom would be left without a hero. The knights asked if the magic circle of summoning was damaged and if they had enough strength to resist the new demon king. Shishihara continued to sit on the floor in complete confusion, not knowing how to respond to all this. Shishihara asked if she could return to her world. The king put his hand to his head and admitted, confused, that he did not know the answer, since the magic circle of summoning was not created by them, and it was unknown whether there was any way to return someone to another world. The ruler, his assistant, and the chief knight bowed their heads in sincere apology. Shishihara lowered her gaze, clutching the folds of her skirt, trying to comprehend the situation. Suddenly, she raised her head, remembering something important. Quickly rising, she asked excitedly if they had seen a boy. His name was Arihara Kaido. The king asked for the name again, clearly showing that he was unfamiliar with this person. Shishihara persisted, explaining that he had been with her when the magic circle appeared and should be here. At these words, the ruler's face paled. Shishihara's eyes widened, and she repeated with growing excitement that he must be somewhere nearby. After hearing these words, the king panicked and shouted at his subordinates to find this Arihara Kaido. The courtiers immediately rushed to carry out the order. Shishihara sank back to the floor, mentally berating herself because she had only apologized and maybe they could have become friends. In her mind, she asked her classmate to be safe. Kaido slowly opened his eyes. His entire body was covered in bandages. With difficulty, he sat up and looked around. The room was bright and cozy, with 2 beds. Lime was sleeping at his feet, and Sif was dozing on the table opposite him. Kaido croaked out a question about his location. The movement on the bed and the sound of his voice instantly woke both familiars. Lime let out a joyful gurgling sound and rushed to his master, while Sif jumped anxiously to his master, expressing relief that Kaido had finally regained consciousness. The main character looked at his familiars and thought about what had happened. Recalling the previous events, he thought that he had escaped from Orochi and that it was not a dream. The shapeshifter, looking at the alarmed Kaito, decided to explain that the hero's body could not withstand the excessive use of support magic. And if people had not saved him, he would most likely have died. Lime looked at his master with wide eyes. Kaido turned pale and froze in fear, Sif's words frightening him. Kaido asked who had saved him. The familiar did not have time to answer before the door to the room flew open and Layla rushed in. Her face lit up with a smile when she saw Kaido had regained consciousness. She came closer and sat down on the bed next to him, happily noticing that the hero had finally woken up and looked much better than she had expected. Such an enthusiastic greeting from a stranger made Kaido feel confused. Sif turned to the girl and explained that she was the one who had saved his master's life. Layla sat down closer and introduced herself, saying she was pleased to meet him. The main character bowed his head, introduced himself, and sincerely thanked Miss Layla. The familiars bowed after him, asking her to accept their gratitude as well. Layla waved away the thanks awkwardly and asked how Kaido was feeling. He began to examine his body with surprise, noting the absence of pain and wondering at the reason for such a quick recovery. Layla smiled and explained that a healer had cured him, expressing her joy that he was all right. Kaido muttered confusedly that he hadn't expected to meet real healers in this world. Then, looking up at Layla, he asked more loudly where he was now. Layla jumped off the bed and began pacing around the room with her hands behind her back. She bounced cheerfully as she walked, informing Kaido that he was in the kingdom of Hendel. More precisely, in the guild's infirmary. Kaido asked uncertainly what the guild was. At that moment, Sif intervened in the conversation, explaining that his master had come from a distant village and was not yet familiar with city customs. Kaido looked at the familiar with bewilderment, not understanding the reason for such a lie. Noticing his confusion, the shapeshifter quietly explained that it was better not to mention his arrival from another world. Hearing Sif's explanation, Kaido slowly nodded in agreement. Layla reacted completely unexpectedly. She jumped up and down with joy, ran to the bed, leaned on it, and brought her face very close to Kaido's. She exclaimed with delight that she had guessed it. The three of them froze in amazement. Sif asked what had caused the girl's excitement. She smiled sweetly and explained that she herself was from a village and therefore understood Kaido perfectly. She continued that, as an older sister, she would tell him everything. The main character asked doubtfully why he should address an unfamiliar girl that way. She asked him his age without hesitation. Hearing that he was 17, Layla triumphantly announced that she was 18, which meant she was older. However, she immediately added that there was no need to get hung up on formalities. They were almost the same age. But in the next moment, her face changed. She remembered the order she had recently taken. Folding her hands in an apologetic gesture, Layla hastily announced that she had to go. On her way out, she called out to Kaido to get some rest and be sure to visit the guild after he recovered, promising to continue their conversation. The door slammed behind her, leaving the room suddenly silent. Kaido continued to stare at the exit, thinking about the unusual, energetic girl. His thoughts were interrupted by Sif, who advised his master to rest and postpone his questions until tomorrow. Kaido agreed. A few days later, when Kaido's health had recovered, the trio left the infirmary. Sif settled on his master's right shoulder, Lime on his left. They froze at the entrance, watching the bustling street life. Elves and werewolves, giants and gnomes, witches and ordinary people, creatures of all kinds and colors, moved before them. Looking at this diversity, Kaido finally realized that he was in another world and understood that his school uniform would look too unusual here. Looking around, the hero noticed an unusual device from which the locals drew water. Before he could ask about its purpose, Sif explained that it was a magical device and expressed surprise that Kaido was seeing such a thing for the first time. Kaido agreed, mentally comparing the device to technology from his own world. Noticing his uncertainty, the changeling reassured him, saying that it only seemed strange for now and that he would soon get used to everything. Kaido nodded again, this time with more confidence. Then the shapeshifter reminded him of the need to meet with Layla, and the three of them headed for the guild building. Kaido slowly opened the door and froze in amazement. His gaze fell upon a noisy room filled with all kinds of visitors. In one corner, groups of people in armor were having fun at tables. A line of people waiting to hand in assignments had formed at the administrator's desk, and people were talking to each other and choosing assignments at the large bulletin board near the. The main character whispered in confusion that there were a lot of people there, and they all looked so strong. Lime gurgled in agreement, and Sif confirmed that even he, as a magical creature, recognized the impressive power of the beings gathered here. A familiar voice came from the back of the hall. Layla, noticing them, quickly approached and asked how Kaido was feeling. He thanked her for her help and asked what kind of place this was. Layla proudly began to explain that the guild serves as a place where residents leave their requests, which are turned into orders that are then carried out by adventurers. The main character clarified that all the people gathered there were adventurers, and Layla said that yes, she was one of them. Kaido remarked that it was very cool. Layla tilted her head thoughtfully, noting that of the two of them, Kaido was cooler because he had managed to survive even after getting lost in the ruins of Orochi. Kaido asked in surprise, but Sif whispered quietly in his ear that in order to hide the hero's identity, the shapeshifter had told the adventurer that he had simply gotten lost. Kaido absent-mindedly thanked his familiar. Ignoring the quiet conversation between Kaido and Sif, Layla continued, noting that Kaido was also a tamer who used mithril slime and a werewolf who could speak. Therefore, the main character was indeed an interesting person, but a little strange. Lime got bored with this conversation and dozed off on his master's shoulder. Sif and Kaido, meanwhile, looked confusedly at the enthusiastic girl. Layla, seeming a little embarrassed by her zeal, asked if Kaido also wanted to become an adventurer. This question made Kaido stammer, clearly not knowing what to do. The shapeshifter came to the rescue again, asking about the necessary conditions. Layla raised her finger seriously, drawing attention, and explained that the guild had an exam, and anyone who was 15 years old and had sufficient strength could take part in it. After these words, Sif said that becoming an adventurer was not a bad idea. He explained that they would not last long without money, and that the atmosphere of the guild would help them strengthen their character. In addition, by completing tasks, they would be able to meet other magical creatures who could become their allies. These arguments made Kaido think. He chuckled quietly and fell silent, considering the proposal. At that moment, two strangers who looked a little older approached them. The girl with long hair immediately recognized Kaido and introduced herself as Fran, explaining that she and the man accompanying her were Layla's partners. The man introduced himself as Keel. The main character bowed, introduced himself, and thanked them for saving him. Keel nodded in response and briefly remarked that he was glad to see him safe and sound. They decided to continue their conversation at a table with drinks. Fran admitted that Kaido had greatly surprised her back then. He was just a scruffy boy talking to monsters, found among the ruined ruins of Orochi. Kaido laughed nervously. Then Keel asked if he was the one who destroyed those ruins. The main character, stammering with excitement, confirmed this and immediately apologized for the possible consequences. Keel told him not to apologize, explaining that the ruins had no historical value and that the only danger came from Orochi, who had settled there. Kaido replied that he understood. Keel nodded in agreement, took a sip from his mug, and fell silent. An awkward pause hung over the table. The main character thought that one of his rescuers was a man of few words. At that moment, a girl whom Kaido had previously seen at the reception desk approached their table. Kaido assumed that she must be one of the guild officials. The girl politely apologized for the disturbance and asked if everything was all right. Layla happily exclaimed the stranger's name, Mai, addressing Kaido directly. Mai handed him a small bag that jingled with coins. Lime immediately crawled closer, looking at it with curiosity. Mai explained that it was compensation from the guild and asked him to accept it. The main character stared at the bag in amazement, trying to understand why he needed this money. Mai explained that the Orochi ruins were under the guild's responsibility, and the fact that he got lost there was partly their fault. Kaido tried to argue that he had ended up there completely by accident. However, Sif quietly advised him to just take the money, noting that it would be easier than continuing to refuse. Listening to his familiar, Kaido accepted the compensation, stood up, bowed, thanked Mai, and thought intently that he would definitely return the money. He didn't know how, but he would. Mai continued that the guild leader himself wanted to hand over the money, but he was too busy. Then Mai bowed and said that she would take her leave. Kaido bowed again, thanking her. The main character turned back to the table and was about to sit down when Keel interrupted him, asking if he was going to become an adventurer. The main character froze in confusion. Fran continued for her partner, saying that the hero had all the necessary qualities, so why not earn some extra money? Layla looked closely at Kaido. He hesitantly admitted that he hadn't decided on his plans yet. Sif was about to say something, but Layla beat him to it, quickly jumping up to the main character. She happily grabbed Kaido's hands and offered to show him around the city, promising to recommend a good hotel. Ignoring any objections, Layla dragged Kaido to the exit, asking her companions on the way if they had finished their work for the day. Fran waved goodbye, confirming that there was nothing urgent, and wished them a good walk. Keel, who looked a little confused, also wished them fun. Friend noticed that Layla was literally glowing with enthusiasm, and Keel added that it was good that she had finally found a friend her own age. Meanwhile, Kaido, his familiars, and his new acquaintance set off to explore the city. In the central square, Kaido tried not to stare at the various creatures. But judging by Layla's smile, he wasn't doing a very good job. At Layla's insistence, they entered the arena. There, they watched an exciting battle between magicians. Powerful streams of water collided with air barriers created with a single wave of the hand. After enjoying the spectacle, the group continued their walk. Entering the atelier, Kaido thought about changing his clothes, but changed his mind at the last moment. Instead, they sampled local delicacies, getting acquainted with the cuisine of this world. It was almost nightfall when the heroes approached a cozy inn. Layla threw open the door, loudly announcing her return. Kaido and his familiars stood behind her, still amazed by her energy. The owner of the establishment, Maruku, came out to meet them and remarked indifferently that her noisiest guest had returned. Then she looked at Kaido and asked who he was. Kaido bowed in greeting and said that he had recently arrived in the city. After a short pause, Maruku introduced herself and explained that she was the manager, then looked at Kaido's familiars and asked if they were magical creatures. After these words, Sif said that he was Kaido's familiar, a shapeshifter. Maruku pressed her fingers to her nose, sighing heavily and saying that she would never see normal visitors again. Layla then joined the conversation, asking the manager to let Kaido stay, since she was still living alone anyway, so there were rooms available. Maruku looked at Kaido again, this time even more intently. Then she said that for 15 days, the room would cost 3 bronze coins and breakfast and dinner were included. Sif let out a surprised sound. Kaido looked at him and asked, confused, if it was too expensive. But the shapeshifter said it was too cheap. After that, Maruku turned around and, as she left, said over her shoulder that he could choose any available room. Layla waved after her and asked her to prepare dinner for her and Kaido, to which the manager simply waved her hand, indicating that she understood. The main character froze in slight confusion, not knowing how to react to what was happening. Then his companion explained that Maruku always sets the price at her discretion and can unerringly sense who has empty pockets. These words elicited surprised looks from both Kaido and Sif. After dinner, he and Layla remained seated at the table. Kaido thanked her for the wonderful meal, and the girl agreed, noting that Maruku was the best cook in the area. Kaido expressed his gratitude for everything Layla had done for him, but she just smiled and said that looking at him reminded her of her first days in the city. As she had already mentioned, Layla was also from a village. She had grown tired of village life, and 3 years ago, she had come to the city, even though at that time, she couldn't tell left from right. And if it weren't for the help of others, she would not have become an adventurer. Looking straight into Kaido's eyes, Layla admitted that she probably couldn't walk past him precisely because she saw in him the same lonely and confused person she had been in her early days. Kaido thought about her words. He realized that he might never see his family and friends again, never return to his world. But accepting this reality proved too difficult, and he subconsciously rejected all the opportunities that this new world offered, avoiding thoughts about the future. Then the main character whispered, "Why not take the first step?" Noticing his thoughtfulness, Layla, Sif, and even Lime began to call out to him, trying to bring his attention back to reality. Suddenly, Kaido raised his head and firmly announced his decision to take the exam to become an adventurer. The shapeshifter meowed happily, and Layla asked in surprise what had caused such a sudden determination. The main character explained that there was no point in sitting idly by and worrying, and now he was ready to do everything possible to start a new life. Sif literally beamed at these words, supporting his master. Layla was delighted and suggested that they go to the guild together the next day to register for the exam. The next morning at the Adventurers Guild building, Kaido put his hand on his chest, trying to calm his suddenly racing heart. Layla gave him an encouraging nudge with her shoulder, saying that it was just registration. She ran off to find someone from the staff, leaving the 3 of them alone. The next moment, Sif suddenly became alert and snorted tensely. Kaido followed his gaze and saw a mysterious figure in a cloak, who addressed him by name. Her intense gaze made Kaido freeze. He stumbled, searching for words. Then he excitedly introduced himself as Jacob Rising. These words shocked Sif, who froze with his eyes wide open. Lime also looked at his master in bewilderment. The stranger repeated his name, studying Kaido intently. Then she turned around, said she had made a mistake, and quickly left. Kaido wanted to follow her with his eyes and apologize, but he discovered that the mysterious figure had already disappeared into the bustling guild hall. Kaido wondered anxiously how the stranger could have known his real name and why she was looking for him. Suddenly, it dawned on him Perhaps this woman was connected to Shishihara. Sif asked excitedly what had happened and who that person was. Kaido froze in indecision, not knowing what to say. The shapeshifter continued that this situation could become a problem, but it was wise to use a different name, because if strangers knew his master's true identity. Then Sif covered his mouth with his paw and laughed at the name Kaido had chosen. In response, the main character looked at his familiar irritably and declared that he had been caught off guard. Their argument was interrupted by Layla's return, who announced that she had arranged everything necessary. They approached the counter where Mai was standing, the same guild employee who had previously handed Kaido his compensation. On the table in front of her was an unusual magic ball. Noticing their confusion, Mai explained that this tool would help determine Kaido's magical abilities and enter them into the database. Mai explained in detail how the device worked. You had to direct a stream of magic into the crystal, and it would visualize these characteristics through color, glow, and unique patterns. This data would then be used to search the guild's archives. Kaido froze in indecision, as he had originally planned to simply sign up for the exam. Layla, noticing this hesitation, explained that she thought it would be a good idea to determine his magical abilities before the exam, so she asked Mai to prepare everything. Sif jumped from his master's shoulder onto the table, approached the crystal, and curiously suggested that they not delay and proceed with the test. Kaido froze for a moment. Then he placed his palm on the surface of the crystal, concentrating intently as he recalled how he had activated his abilities in the ruins of Orochi. Layla and both familiars watched the process closely. Kaido's body was enveloped in a magical glow, and the crystal flashed with a dazzling golden light. For a few seconds, it captured the attention of those around it. Layla quietly admired the unusual color emanating from the magical instrument. Mai, studying the glow, first assumed it was yellow, but then confidently identified it as gold. She immediately dismissed the possibility that it belonged to the element of lightning. When Kaido asked about the result, Mai silently walked over to the bookshelves and took out a voluminous tome. She quickly flipped through the pages and confirmed that his magic was indeed of the gold type. But there were no records of such a phenomenon in the archives. The main character asked in amazement how rare his magic was. Mai said that she had found and confirmed its rarity. She solemnly announced that Kaido possessed true magic. When Kaido asked about the meaning of this term, Mai began to read the definition from the book. True magic is described as a power with an extremely high concentration that goes beyond the standard classification and cannot be categorized using conventional methods. She confirmed that his magic truly belonged to this type. But the golden variant. Sif approached Mai and asked for clarification about the classification system. Mai explained that there are 5 levels of magic purity: yellow, red, silver, gold, and white silver, with yellow representing the lowest purity and white silver the highest. She noted that in the modern era, the gold type is practically unheard of. Continuing to study the book, Mai added that the golden type of magic is not found in humans. According to the records, only ancient beings possess it. Layla jumped up with an astonished question about who Kaido was then. Sif tried to smooth things over by asking if the master's magic was particularly pure. Kaido nervously bit his lip, thinking about the nature of his abilities. However, Mai's next words made him flinch. She warned that in ancient times, people with true magic were sacrificed to monsters. Although this tradition has disappeared, some monsters that have tasted such magic still exist. Sif, calmly licking his paw, suggested that Orochi might be one such creature. This thought caused a new wave of fear to wash over Kaido. He hesitantly asked if other monsters like Orochi would hunt him down because of his magic. Mai reassured Kaido with an encouraging smile, explaining that such powerful creatures were practically non-existent in the modern world. Kaido muttered quietly that he now understood the situation. He then asked if his magic was so compatible with Sif and Lime because it was genuine. The shapeshifter nodded approvingly, keeping his attentive gaze on his master, and confirmed that this explained their unusually high compatibility. Then he grinned widely, proudly declaring that he had always expected only the best from his master. Lime responded with a happy gurgling sound, expressing his complete agreement. Kaido smiled confidently and raised his clenched fist. Despite his initial fear caused by the conversation about sacrifices, he was genuinely happy that his true magic was helping Sif and Lime become stronger. Kaido then turned to the guild employee. He enthusiastically announced his decision to take the exam for adventurers. Mai handed him the registration form with a warm smile, noting that she was already prepared for this. Kaido picked up a quill pen, but suddenly froze, realizing that he did not know the local writing system. The guild employee watched his confusion with surprise. Layla quickly intervened, explaining that her friend had come from another country. Kaido muttered confusedly about what to do in this situation. His companion offered a solution. She could fill out the form, and Kaido could simply copy her text. Layla asked Mai if this was acceptable. After a moment's thought, the guild employee replied that the main requirement was that it be filled out by hand, so it was probably okay. Layla smiled encouragingly and explained to Kaido that now he would need to carefully copy the sample she had prepared. Late in the evening, Kaido was lying on the bed in his room. Lime was curled up next to him, and Sif was sleeping on the bedside table. Kaido thought about how much Layla had done for him today, especially helping him with the application. He continued his thought aloud, wondering why he hadn't even noticed his own illiteracy, even though he understood spoken language without any problems. There were only 19 days left before the exam, and during that time, he needed to learn at least a little bit of writing and basic knowledge about this world. These words woke Sif up. Stretching, the shapeshifter noted that studying was good, but training should not be forgotten. He warned that there would be no leniency in training. Kaido just smiled happily in response, taking it as a challenge. The next morning began with intense training. Kaido used a combination of his true magic and Sif's strengthening spells, trying to lift a massive boulder on which both of his familiars were sitting. Layla watched the process from a safe distance. The shapeshifter noted the impressive effectiveness of the combination of their magical abilities with a slight smirk. Kaido, struggling to speak due to the strain, muttered that he wouldn't be able to get out of bed tomorrow because of muscle pain. Layla smiled and offered the help of a healer she knew, if needed. The next test was running while using magic, where the same boulder was attached to the exhausted Kaido. After the grueling training, Kaido literally collapsed, while Sif continued to cheer up his master, who had lost touch with reality due to exhaustion. Layla brought a healer who, although looking displeased, quickly restored Kaido's strength. This became their daily routine. In the morning, they underwent intensive training, where Kaido developed his strength, agility, and speed, practicing interaction with Lime, who turned into various weapons in his master's hands. The evenings were devoted to study. Layla patiently taught her friend the local writing system and the basics of the world order. Finally, the day of the exam arrived. Kaido, accompanied by his familiars, arrived at the guild. Kaido was visibly nervous, but he tried to remain calm, convincing himself that he had done everything possible to prepare. On the table in front of him lay a tablet with a symbol denoting the number 5. Sif, trying to lighten the mood, remarked that there were unexpectedly few participants. Kaido suggested that this was due to the monthly exam. Suddenly, the door creaked. Turning at the sound, the hero saw a girl in a cloak entering, the very one who knew his name from somewhere. Sif also instantly became alert. The stranger approached their table. Both familiars watched her intently, protecting their master. The girl ignored their hostility and politely asked if she could join them. Kaido frowned slightly and agreed. Taking a seat at the table, the stranger suddenly raised her hand and looked at it intently. Kaido asked if something was wrong. The girl replied that nothing was wrong. She explained that she was just surprised at how calm she was. Kaido stared at her in bewilderment. Then she asked if he had also come to take the exam, but called him Jacob. Kaido asked her to repeat herself. His companion looked at him in confusion, reminding him that he had introduced himself by that name last time, and asked if she had made a mistake. The main character froze in fear. He remembered his rashly invented name. He turned to Sif with a silent plea for help. However, the shapeshifter covered her mouth with her paw and tried her best not to laugh. Seeing this reaction, Kaido's eyes and mouth opened even wider in indignation. Pulling himself together, he turned to the stranger and stammered that it was indeed his name, then asked her what her name was. The girl introduced herself as Lifa and said she had been assigned number 4. Kaido asked if she also wanted to become an adventurer. She replied that she didn't particularly want to, but she noted that one could find good companions among the adventurers. The main character asked again. She explained that she meant people you could trust. Then her attention shifted to Kaido's familiars. Lifa asked if Kaido was a tamer. He barely had time to nod. The girl jumped up and began bombarding him with questions. How good his companions were in battle, what abilities they possessed, and whether it was true that they could talk, as she had thought during their previous encounter. Lifa stared intently at the hero, waiting for answers. He was torn between wondering why she knew his name, why she was looking for him, and whether she was somehow connected to Shishihara. But he immediately stopped himself, realizing that he couldn't ask these questions without revealing his true identity. At that moment, the door creaked behind him. A guild employee entered the room and announced that everything was ready and the participants could proceed to the training ground. Lifa instantly switched gears, waved her hand, and said it was time for them to go. Kaido nodded silently. As the group headed to the exam site, the main character noticed that his new acquaintance was following closely behind him. They came out onto a spacious training field. They saw a young man in armor, standing relaxed with his sword slung over his shoulder, clearly waiting for them. When everyone had gathered, the man in front of them announced that he would be their examiner and introduced himself as Rick. He warned that he would be strict in his judging and told everyone to take note of this. Excited whispers spread among the examinees. One asked if this was the same Rick casing, another asked if he was a gold-ranked adventurer, and a girl remarked that she had expected a strict test, but not such a harsh one. Rick, ignoring these comments, continued that he would not give anyone any leniency, because the guild must trust its members. Any mistake, he said, casts a shadow on the reputation of the entire organization, so the selection process will be as strict as possible. He emphasized that even recommendations from guild superiors, noble origins, or kinship with the royal family would not influence his assessment, only personal abilities. This speech made the examinees pale and freeze. Rick then announced that the test would be a battle, allowing any styles and types of weapons to be used, but that they would have to fight seriously. The girl asked fearfully what would happen if someone got hurt. In response, the adventurer explained that they would not have to fight each other. Their opponent would be him. With these words, Rick held his sword in front of him and urged them to fight as if their lives depended on it. Kaido turned pale and began to shake with fear. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.